The stagecoach rattled into Yankton, Dakota Territory, on a blistering June afternoon in 1876, carrying a woman who would change everything for Isaac Owens. Though he didn't know it yet, as he stood outside the general store, loading supplies onto his wagon. Grace Oliver climbed down from the coach with trembling legs, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder and a bundle wrapped in faded calico pressed against her chest. The bundle squirmed and let out a tiny cry that made several townspeople turn their heads. Grace's face flushed scarlet as she felt their eyes sweep over her, lingering on her ringless left hand, before darting away with barely concealed judgment. Isaac noticed her immediately, not because of the whispers already starting around him, but because she looked utterly lost. Her green eyes scanned the dusty main street of Yankton with something close to desperation, and the way she held that baby spoke of fierce protection mixed with bone-deep exhaustion. Her dark blonde hair had come loose from its pins during the long journey, and her simple gray dress was covered in trail dust. "Miss, you need help with your things." Isaac found himself speaking before he'd fully decided to approach her. Grace's eyes snapped to his face, wary and searching. She saw a tall man in his mid-20s with sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that needed cutting, and brown eyes that held none of the condemnation she'd seen in too many faces lately. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, worn denims and a faded blue shirt, boots that had seen plenty of miles. "I'm looking for the boarding house," she said quietly, her voice hoarse from dust and disuse. "Mrs. Patterson's place is just down the street there," Isaac said, pointing. "But she's particular about who she takes in. Might I ask if you're planning to stay in Yankton long?" The question wasn't asked with any malice, just practical curiosity, but Grace's shoulders stiffened anyway. The baby in her arms let out another cry, louder this time, and she automatically began to sway and hush the child. "As long as I need to," she said, lifting her chin despite the fear in her eyes. "I'm looking for work, actually. I can cook, clean, so keep accounts. I'm a hard worker." Isaac noticed how her hands trembled slightly. He also noticed how several of the town's more respectable ladies were already clustered together, whispering behind their hands. He recognized that look, that eager cruelty that came from people who felt righteous in their judgment. "Well," he said slowly, "Mrs. Patterson might not be your best option then. She's got strong opinions about propriety." He saw Grace's face fall, watched her scan the street again with growing panic. "But there might be another solution. My ranch is about 5 miles outside town. I've been needing someone to help with the house. Previous woman who did it moved to Oregon with her family last month. Place is pretty much falling apart without her." Grace stared at him, confusion and suspicion warring on her features. "You don't know anything about me. I know you need work and a place to stay. I know you've got a child to care for, and I know that look on those ladies' faces over there means you're not going to find much welcome in town." Isaac shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how forward this might seem. "I'm not suggesting anything improper, mind you. There's a separate cabin on the property, used to house the foreman before he died last winter. It's small but sound. You'd have your own space, your own door with a lock. I'd pay fair wages plus room and board." "Why would you help me?" Grace asked bluntly. "You don't know me. You don't know my circumstances." Isaac was quiet for a moment, watching the baby's tiny fist wave in the air. "My mother raised me and my sister alone after my father died when I was 10. Worked her fingers to the bone trying to make ends meet. I remember how people treated her, like she was less somehow because she didn't have a man to speak for her. She died 5 years ago, but I remember wishing someone had just offered her a fair shake without all the judgment." Something in Grace's expression cracked just slightly, a hairline fracture in her careful composure. "What's your name?" "Isaac Owens. I run a cattle ranch, about 200 head. It's not fancy, but it's honest work and honest pay. Grace Oliver." She hesitated, then added, "This is Lily. She's 4 months old." Isaac nodded to the baby. "Pleased to meet you both. Look, I've got to finish loading supplies here, then I'm heading back to the ranch. You're welcome to come with me, see the place before you decide anything. If you don't like it, I'll bring you back to town tomorrow, and you can make other arrangements. No obligation either way." Grace looked at the cluster of women still watching them, at the boarding house down the street where she could already imagine the door closing in her face, at the long, dusty road stretching in every direction. Then she looked at Isaac Owens, searching his face for signs of deception or ulterior motives. She'd gotten good at reading men in the past year, learning the hard way which ones to trust and which to run from. What she saw in Isaac's face was straightforward honesty. It scared her almost as much as the alternative, because she'd stopped believing in straightforward honesty. "All right," she said finally. "I'll come see the place." Isaac's face broke into a genuine smile. "Good, let me finish loading up here. Shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. You can wait in the wagon if you like. Get out of this sun." He helped her up onto the wagon seat with careful courtesy, making sure she and the baby were settled before he went back to loading supplies. Grace watched him work, noting the easy strength in his movements, the way he checked each box and sack with practiced efficiency. Several men called greetings to him as they passed, and he responded with friendly nods. Clearly he was known and respected in town. The baby fussed in her arms, and Grace knew Lily would need feeding soon. The thought made her anxious. She'd have to explain her situation, at least partially, and soon. But for now she let herself rest, just for these few stolen minutes, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Isaac finished loading and climbed up beside her. "All set. It's about an hour's drive. Road's a bit rough in places, so speak up if you need me to slow down." He clicked his tongue at the horses and they started forward, leaving Yankton behind in a cloud of dust. Grace watched the town recede and tried to ignore the tight knot of anxiety in her chest. She'd learned to be brave this past year, to keep moving forward even when everything inside her wanted to curl up and surrender. Lily depended on her. That was all that mattered. They rode in silence for the first 20 minutes, nothing but the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clop of hooves filling the air. The landscape stretched out around them, rolling prairie dotted with scrub grass and the occasional stand of cottonwoods. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals in the hot afternoon air. "How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?" Grace finally said, breaking the silence. 26. "You?" 23. She paused. "You said you have a sister." "Had. Sarah died of fever 3 years ago, right after she married. She was only 19. Isaac's voice went quiet. "So it's just me now. Ranch belonged to my uncle originally. He left it to me when he passed because he had no children of his own. I'm sorry about your sister." "Thank you." Isaac glanced at her. "What about you? Do you have family?" Grace's arms tightened around Lily. "My parents died of cholera when I was 15. I have a brother somewhere, but we lost touch years ago. He went west to try mining in California. Never heard from him again." "That must have been hard." It was. Grace didn't elaborate and Isaac didn't press. They rode on, the sun beating down relentlessly. Lily started crying in earnest, her face scrunching up and turning red. Grace tried soothing her, but the baby was having none of it. "She's hungry," Grace said, her voice tight with embarrassment. "I need to feed her." Isaac immediately pulled the wagon to a stop. "There's a creek just over that rise with some trees for shade. Take your time, I'll check the horses." He helped her down and pointed the way, then busied himself with the horses, giving her privacy. Grace hurried to the creek, finding a secluded spot beneath a spreading cottonwood. She settled down with her back against the trunk and began nursing Lily, relief flooding through her as the baby latched on and quieted. This was always the hardest part, navigating the practical realities of caring for an infant while trying to maintain some semblance of dignity and propriety. She'd gotten used to feeding Lily in stagecoach stops, in alleys, behind buildings, anywhere she could find a moment of privacy during their long journey from Kansas. She tried not to think about Kansas, about everything that had happened there. About James with his easy smile and easier promises. About the way he'd disappeared the moment she told him about the baby. About the minister's wife who'd taken her in for a while, then quietly suggested it was time for Grace to move on before her condition became too obvious. About the long, terrifying months working whatever job she could find, hiding her growing belly under loose dresses, saving every penny for the journey west where maybe, just maybe, she could start over. Lily finished nursing and Grace adjusted her clothing, then carried the baby back to the wagon. Isaac was waiting patiently, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. He looked up as she approached and immediately put the knife away. "Everything all right?" "Yes, thank you." Grace climbed back onto the wagon seat with his help, Lily now drowsy and content in her arms. They continued on, and before long Isaac pointed ahead to a cluster of buildings in the distance. "That's the ranch. Main house is the big one, barn and outbuildings there to the left, and the foreman's cabin is that smaller structure to the right." As they drew closer, Grace took in the details. The main house was a solid 2-story structure made of timber, with a wide porch running along the front. It looked sturdy but clearly lacked a woman's touch, the yard around it bare of any flowers or decorative elements. The barn was well maintained, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. The foreman's cabin Isaac had mentioned was indeed small, but it had a stone chimney and its own little porch. Isaac pulled the wagon up to the main house and helped Grace down. "Let me show you around. We'll start with the cabin since that's where you'd be staying." He led her across the yard to the small cabin, producing a key from his pocket to unlock the door. Inside, it was a single room with a bed frame in one corner, a small table and 2 chairs, a wood stove for cooking and heating, and a few shelves built into the walls. It was dusty from disuse but otherwise clean and sound. "It's not much," Isaac said, "but like I said, it's solid. Roof doesn't leak, door has a good lock. I could bring over some extra blankets and things from the main house. There's a well pump right outside and the privy is just beyond those trees there." Grace walked slowly around the space, taking it in. It was small, yes, but it was more than she'd had in months. It was a door she could lock, walls that would keep out the wind and rain, a stove to cook on. It was safety. "Now let me show you the main house so you can see what the work would entail." The main house was larger than it had appeared from outside. The ground floor consisted of a large kitchen with a cast iron stove and good counter space, a parlor with worn but comfortable furniture, and a dining room with a long table. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms and a small study. Everything was dusty, the floors needed scrubbing, dishes were piled in the kitchen, and there was a general air of neglect that came from a bachelor trying and failing to keep up with housework. "I'm not a complete slob," Isaac said with a hint of sheepishness. "But I spend most of my time out with the cattle or repairing fences or any of 100 other things that need doing. Housework just keeps falling by the wayside. Mrs. Henderson used to keep the place spotless. I've missed that." "What would you expect of me?" Grace asked, always practical. "Cooking, mainly. Cleaning as you have time for it. Maybe some mending. I've got a pile of shirts that need buttons replaced. Anything else would be extra and appreciated but not required. I know you've got the baby to care for, so I'm not expecting you to work every minute of every day. What about wages? $20 a month plus room and board. You take your meals in the main house, or I can bring food to your cabin if you prefer. Whatever makes sense with Lily's schedule. Grace blinked. $20 was more than she'd hoped for, more than she'd earned at any of her previous positions. Combined with room and board, it was more than fair. And there's nothing else expected, she asked bluntly. No other services. Isaac's ears turned red and he looked genuinely shocked. No, madam, nothing like that. I'm offering you honest work for honest pay, that's all. You'd be my employee, nothing more. Grace studied his face and saw nothing but sincerity. Still, she'd been fooled before. I need to be clear about my situation. Lily's father isn't in the picture. He's not coming back. I'm not married, not widowed, just alone. I won't lie about that. That doesn't matter to me, Isaac said firmly. Your past is your business. I'm offering you a job because I need the help and you need the work. What brought you here isn't my concern. Those words, spoken with such straightforward conviction, nearly undid Grace's careful composure. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She couldn't afford to break down now. All right, she said, her voice steady despite everything. I'll take the job. When do you want me to start? Is tomorrow too soon? You must be exhausted from traveling. Tomorrow is fine. I'd like to get settled in the cabin today if that's all right. Of course. Let me help you move your things and I'll bring over some supplies to get you started. Blankets, dishes, food, whatever you need. Isaac was as good as his word. He carried Grace's single bag to the cabin, then made several trips from the main house bringing bedding, towels, a lamp and oil, dishes and utensils, and a box of food staples. He even brought a wooden crate that he turned on its side to make a makeshift cradle for Lily. I'll see about getting you a proper cradle, he said, as he patted the crate with soft blankets. This will work for now, but she'll be more comfortable in something built for the purpose. Grace watched him work, this stranger who'd shown her more kindness in a few hours than she'd encountered in months. She didn't know what to make of him, didn't know if she could trust this, or if it would all fall apart like everything else had. But Lily was sleeping peacefully in her arms, and the cabin was warm and welcoming, and for the first time in so long, Grace felt like she could breathe. Thank you, she said when Isaac finished setting up the cabin. The words felt inadequate for everything he'd done, but they were all she had. You're welcome. I'll leave you to rest now. Come to the main house around 7 tomorrow morning. We'll sort out breakfast and I'll explain what needs doing. After he left, Grace laid Lily in the makeshift cradle and sat down on the bed. The mattress was thin but clean, the blankets soft. She looked around at the small space that was now hers, at the door with its solid lock, at her daughter sleeping peacefully, and she let herself cry for the first time in weeks. Not tears of despair this time, but of relief so profound it shook her whole body. The next morning, Grace woke before dawn out of habit. She fed and changed Lily, washed her face with cold water from the pump outside, and put on her other dress, this one a faded blue that had once been her Sunday best. She brushed out her hair and pinned it up carefully, trying to look presentable and professional. At 7 sharp, she knocked on the door of the main house, Lily bundled in her arms. Isaac answered immediately, already dressed for the day. Good morning. Come in, come in. I was just making coffee, or trying to. I'm not very good at it. The kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and something else, something slightly acrid. Grace followed the smell to the stove where a pot was starting to smoke. Oh my Lord, she said, quickly moving to pull the pot off the heat. What are you doing to this poor coffee? Isaac looked sheepish. I might have forgotten about it. I was feeding the chickens." Grace couldn't help it. She laughed. It felt strange laughter, like a muscle she hadn't used in too long. "All right, let's start over. Do you have a cradle or basket or something I can put Lily in while I work?" Isaac brightened. "Actually, I found something last night." He led her to the parlor where he'd set up an old wooden cradle, clearly handmade, its surface worn smooth by years of use. "This was mine when I was a baby. My mother saved it. I cleaned it up and it should work just fine." Grace set Lily down in the cradle and the baby settled immediately, seeming to approve of her new bed. "This is perfect, thank you. Now then, let's tackle that breakfast. And please teach me how to make decent coffee. I've been suffering through my own attempts for too long." Grace set to work, and it felt wonderful to have a proper kitchen to work in again, with supplies and space and everything she needed. She made coffee, showing Isaac the proper proportions and timing, then started on breakfast. She found eggs in the cold cellar, bacon hanging in the larder, flour for biscuits. Within an hour, she had a proper meal laid out on the dining room table. Isaac sat down and stared at the spread with something like wonder. "This is amazing. I've been living on burnt bacon and hard biscuits for months." "Well, those days are over," Grace said with satisfaction. She'd always been a good cook, learning at her mother's side before the cholera took both her parents. It felt good to use those skills again, to create something with her hands that brought obvious pleasure to someone else. They ate together, falling into an easy conversation about the ranch and what needed doing. Isaac explained his daily routine, which usually started before dawn and went until well past sunset. He ran the ranch with the help of 2 hired hands who lived in a bunkhouse beyond the barn. "Tom and William, they're good men," Isaac said. "Tom is older, been working ranches his whole life. William is younger, still learning. They'll be around sometimes for meals, usually just lunch since they are in town or out on the range most other times." "Do they know about me?" "I told them I hired someone to help with the house. That's all they need to know." After breakfast, Isaac showed Grace around the kitchen more thoroughly, explaining where everything was kept and what supplies needed ordering from town. Then he headed out to start his day's work, leaving Grace to tackle the substantial task of cleaning the house. She worked steadily through the morning, stopping periodically to check on Lily or feed her. The baby was content to lie in her cradle, watching the dust motes dance in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Grace scrubbed floors, washed windows, dusted every surface, and organized the kitchen properly. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way her previous temporary jobs had never been. This felt less like desperation and more like building something, creating a space that was clean and welcoming. Around noon, Isaac came back for lunch with 2 other men in tow. Tom was indeed older, maybe 50, with graying hair and a weathered face. William was probably 19 or 20, lanky and sunburned, with an easy grin. "This is Grace Oliver," Isaac introduced her. "Grace, this is Tom Farley and William Foster." Both men nodded politely, their eyes flicking to the baby in the cradle but making no comment. Grace appreciated their discretion more than they could know. She served them lunch, a simple meal of sandwiches and beans she'd found in the pantry, but the men ate like it was a feast. Tom particularly seemed impressed with the coffee. "Now this is how coffee should taste," he announced. "No offense, boss, but your coffee could strip paint." Isaac laughed. "None taken. I'm well aware of my limitations in the kitchen." After the men left, Grace continued working through the afternoon. She tackled the parlor, beating dust from the furniture, sweeping down cobwebs, scrubbing the windows until they sparkled. By the time evening rolled around, the downstairs of the house looked transformed. Isaac came in for dinner and stopped in his tracks, looking around in amazement. "Is this the same house? It looks incredible." Grace felt a flush of pride. "There's still plenty to do. The upstairs needs work, and I haven't even touched your study yet, but it's a start." "It's more than a start, it's a miracle. Let me wash up and I'll help you with dinner." "You don't need to help. That's what you're paying me for." "Maybe so, but I'm not the kind to sit idle while someone else works." Isaac paused. "Besides, I'd like to learn. Can't depend on someone else forever, need to be able to feed myself if necessary." So Grace taught him how to make a proper stew and how to bake bread that wasn't rock hard. They worked side by side in the kitchen, and Grace found herself relaxing in his company. Isaac had an easy way about him, never pushing or prying, just being steady and present. He made silly jokes that made her smile, and he was surprisingly good at entertaining Lily, making funny faces that had the baby giggling. This became their routine over the following days and weeks. Grace would arrive at the main house each morning, Lily in her arms, and set about her work while Isaac managed the ranch. She cooked meals that Isaac proclaimed were the best he'd ever had, cleaned and organized every corner of the house, and gradually brought order to the chaos of bachelor living. In the evenings, Isaac would help with dinner, and they'd sit together at the long dining table, talking about their days. Grace learned that Isaac was passionate about his cattle, that he had big dreams of expanding the ranch someday. He told her stories about growing up in Dakota Territory, about his Uncle James who'd taught him everything about ranching, about his mother who'd been strict but loving. He spoke about his sister Sarah with obvious grief still fresh years after her death. In turn, Grace found herself opening up in small ways. She told him about her parents, about growing up in a small town in Missouri, about how much she'd loved helping her father in his carpentry shop. She talked about books she'd read and places she hoped to see someday. She didn't talk about James, about how she'd fallen for his charm and believed his promises, about the shame and fear that had followed. But she sensed that Isaac understood there were places she wasn't ready to go yet, and he never pushed. Tom and William became regular fixtures at lunch, and Grace grew to appreciate their steady presence. Tom had a dry sense of humor and a wealth of knowledge about cattle and ranching. William was eager and enthusiastic, always ready to help with anything that needed doing. Both men treated Grace with respect, never making her feel judged or uncomfortable. One morning in early August, Grace arrived at the main house to find Isaac in the kitchen looking frustrated, a letter in his hand. "Everything all right?" she asked, settling Lily in her cradle. "Letter from the bank in Yankton. They're pushing me to expand faster than I'm comfortable with. Apparently, they think I'm not ambitious enough." He crumpled the letter and tossed it aside. "Sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it, you know. The constant worry about money and cattle prices and droughts and a dozen other things." Grace poured him coffee and sat down across from him. "Why do you do it then? Why ranching?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. "Because it's mine. Because when I'm out there with the cattle, just me and the land and the sky, I feel free in a way I never do anywhere else. Because I'm building something that matters, something that'll last." He looked up at her. "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Grace said softly. "Everyone needs something that's theirs, something they're building toward. What about you? What are you building toward?" The question caught Grace off guard. She looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her cradle. "Security, I suppose. A life where I don't have to be afraid anymore. A place where Lily can grow up safe and loved." "You have that here," Isaac said, "for as long as you want it." Something in his tone made Grace look at him more closely. There was an intensity in his eyes that hadn't been there before, or maybe it had been there all along, and she was only now letting herself see it. Her heart started beating faster. "Isaac," she started, not knowing what she wanted to say, but he was already standing, moving toward the door. I should get to work. Tom wants to move the cattle to the north pasture today. After he left, Grace sat in the quiet kitchen, her coffee growing cold in front of her. Something was shifting between them, had been shifting for weeks now. She'd been so focused on just surviving, on keeping her head down and doing her work, that she hadn't let herself acknowledge the way her heart lifted when she saw Isaac's smile, or how much she looked forward to their evening conversations, or how safe she felt in his presence. But acknowledging those feelings was terrifying. The last time she'd trusted a man, let herself believe in promises and possibilities, she'd ended up alone and pregnant, fleeing across states to escape the shame. How could she trust her own judgment again? How could she risk not just her own heart, but Lily's future? She forced herself to focus on work, throwing herself into deep cleaning the upstairs bedrooms. But her mind kept wandering back to Isaac, to the look in his eyes, to the question that hung unanswered between them. That evening, Isaac was quiet during dinner. They ate in an awkward silence that felt foreign after weeks of easy conversation. Finally, as Grace was clearing the plates, Isaac spoke. "I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable this morning. I shouldn't have said what I said." Grace paused, plates in hand. "You didn't make me uncomfortable, you just made me think." "About what?" She set the plates down and turned to face him. "About what I'm doing here, about what this is." "What do you want it to be?" Isaac asked quietly. Grace wanted to be brave enough to answer honestly, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead she said, "I should get Lily back to the cabin. It's past her bedtime." Isaac nodded, disappointment flickering across his face before he masked it. "Of course. I'll see you tomorrow." That night, Grace lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to Lily's soft breathing from the cradle beside her. Through the window, she could see the lights of the main house, and she wondered if Isaac was lying awake too, thinking about the same things she was. The next few days passed in careful politeness. Isaac and Grace both seemed to be trying extra hard to keep things normal, to not acknowledge the tension that had grown between them. But it was there in every accidental touch when passing dishes, in the way their eyes met and held a moment too long before skittering away. On Saturday, Isaac announced he needed to go into Yankton for supplies and asked if Grace needed anything from town. She gave him a list of household items, and he promised to be back by evening. Grace used his absence to give herself a stern talking to while she worked. She couldn't keep avoiding this. Isaac had been nothing but kind and respectful to her. He'd given her a job when no one else would have, treated her with dignity, welcomed Lily without judgment. He was a good man. The question was whether she was brave enough to let herself believe in good men again. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Isaac returned, his wagon loaded with supplies. But instead of just bringing in the household goods, he also carried in a large wrapped package. "What's that?" Grace asked. "Something I saw in town and thought you might need." He set the package on the table and gestured for her to open it. Grace unwrapped it carefully and gasped. Inside was a beautiful rocking chair made of smooth oak, with gentle curves and expert craftsmanship. It was the kind of chair a mother would use to rock her baby, the kind Grace had dreamed of but never thought she'd own. "Isaac, I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not too much. I noticed you always stand when you're feeding Lily or trying to get her to sleep. I thought you could use a comfortable place to sit." He ran his hand over the chair's smooth back. "The carpenter in town made it. He does good work." Grace traced the arm of the chair, her vision blurring with tears. It wasn't just the chair itself, though it was beautiful. It was the thoughtfulness behind it, the fact that Isaac had noticed something she needed and taken steps to provide it. It was being cared for, being seen. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Isaac helped her carry the chair to her cabin, setting it by the window where she'd have good light. When he turned to leave, Grace caught his arm. "Isaac, wait." He turned back, and Grace saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. Hope mixed with fear, longing held in check by uncertainty. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about Lily's father. You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share." "I want to, I need to." Grace took a breath. "His name was James Murray. I met him in Kansas. I was working as a seamstress there after leaving Missouri. He was charming and handsome and said all the right things. He told me he was going to buy land and build a house and we'd have a wonderful life together. I believed him. I believed everything." She paused, the memories painful even now. "When I told him I was pregnant, he said he'd make things right. He said we'd get married immediately. Then he disappeared. Just vanished one night, left town without a word. I found out later he was already married, had a wife and 2 children back in Illinois. The whole time he'd been lying to me." Isaac's jaw tightened with anger, but when he spoke his voice was gentle. "That wasn't your fault. He deceived you. Maybe. But I still made the choice to trust him, to believe in promises that were too good to be true. And now Lily has to grow up without a father because of my mistakes." "Lily has you," Isaac said firmly. "And you're doing an incredible job raising her. She's happy and healthy and loved. That matters more than anything else. People don't see it that way. You know what they see when they look at me? They see shame, sin, a woman who's fallen. They don't care about the circumstances." Isaac took a step closer. "I don't care what other people think. I care what I think, and what I see is a woman who's brave and strong and resourceful. A woman who traveled hundreds of miles alone with an infant to build a better life. A woman who works hard every day to provide for her child. That's not shame, Grace, that's courage." Grace felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "Why are you so kind to me? What do you want from this? Honestly." Isaac reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "I want to know you. I want to hear your laugh every day. I want to watch Lily grow up. I want to build something with you, something real and lasting. But only if that's what you want too. I won't push you, won't expect anything you're not ready to give. I just want a chance." Grace looked into his earnest face and felt something inside her shift, like a locked door finally opening. She'd been so afraid for so long, so certain she couldn't trust anyone. But Isaac had proven himself day after day, week after week, showing through his actions that he was a man of his word. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of trusting again, of believing in promises. I'm scared of what happens if this doesn't work out, if you change your mind or realize you don't want the complication of a woman with a child." "I understand that fear," Isaac said. "And I can't promise to be perfect or to never make mistakes, but I can promise to be honest with you always, and I can promise that I'm not going to change my mind or disappear. When I commit to something, I see it through." Grace thought about the ranch, about how Isaac had built it up from nothing through sheer determination and hard work. She thought about how he spoke of his mother and sister, the love and loyalty evident in every word. She thought about his treatment of her and Lily, consistent and kind from the very first day. "I want a chance too," she said quietly. "I want to see where this could go, but we need to take it slow. I need time to learn to trust again." Isaac's face broke into a brilliant smile. "Slow is fine. Slow is good. I'm not going anywhere." He squeezed her hand gently and left, and Grace sank into her new rocking chair, pulling Lily into her arms. She rocked slowly back and forth, feeling the smooth motion, thinking about Isaac's words and the promise of possibility they held. Over the following weeks, things between Grace and Isaac developed gradually, sweetly. They still maintained their professional boundaries during working hours, but in the evenings they'd sit on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Isaac would hold Lily sometimes, bouncing her on his knee or making her giggle with silly songs. Grace found herself watching them together, her heart swelling with an emotion she was afraid to name. Isaac courted her old-fashioned and proper, bringing her wildflowers from the prairie, saving interesting articles from newspapers to share with her, teaching her to ride one of the gentler horses so she could see more of the ranch. They talked about their hopes and dreams, their fears and failures, building a foundation of understanding and trust. One September evening, they rode out together to a rise that overlooked the ranch. Isaac had arranged for William to watch Lily for a few hours, the young cowboy delighted to play with the baby. Grace sat beside Isaac on the grass, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Isaac said. "I come up here when I need to think, to get perspective on things. I can see why. It's beautiful. Grace, I need to tell you something." Isaac turned to face her. "I've been trying to take things slow like you asked, and I will continue to do that as long as you need. But I want you to know where I stand. I love you. I'm in love with you. I love your strength and your kindness and your laugh. I love how you sing to Lily when you think no one's listening. I love how you put your whole heart into everything you do. And I love Lily too, love her like she was my own." Grace felt her breath catch. She'd known this was coming, felt it building between them, but hearing the words spoken out loud still shook her. "I'm not asking you to say it back," Isaac continued. "I just wanted you to know you don't have to be ready yet. I'm a patient man." Grace looked at this man who'd given her so much, who'd changed her life in ways she was still coming to understand. She thought about the terror she'd felt getting off that stagecoach in Yankton, certain she'd find only judgment and closed doors. She thought about Isaac's immediate kindness, his unwavering respect, the way he'd created a safe space for her and Lily to heal and grow. She thought about how her heart jumped every time she saw him, how his smile could brighten her darkest moods, how right it felt to build a life alongside him. She thought about Lily's delighted giggles when Isaac held her, about the gentleness in his hands when he touched either of them. "I love you too," she said, and watched joy transform his face. "I didn't think I could feel this way again, didn't think I'd want to. But you've shown me that trust isn't foolish, it's just about finding the right person to trust. And you're that person, Isaac. You're everything I didn't know I was looking for." Isaac cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and reverent, like she was something precious. Grace kissed him back, pouring all her hope and love and gratitude into it. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Will you marry me?" Isaac asked. "I know we haven't been courting long, and if you need more time, I understand. But I want you to know my intentions are honorable. I want to marry you properly, make you my wife, make Lily my daughter in every way that matters." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes again, but this time they were purely tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They rode back to the ranch in the gathering twilight, hands clasped between them, making plans for their future. They decided to have a simple ceremony in Yankton, just the two of them and whatever witnesses they needed. Neither wanted a big fuss, preferring to focus on the commitment they were making rather than the ceremony itself. 2 weeks later, on a crisp October morning, they rode into Yankton together. Grace wore a new dress Isaac had bought her, a soft green that brought out her eyes, and she carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. Lily was dressed in a white gown Grace had sewn by hand, working late into the nights to make it perfect. The minister married them in the small church, with Tom and William standing as witnesses. If the minister had opinions about Grace's situation, he kept them to himself, focusing instead on the commitment and love evident between the couple before him. When Isaac slipped the simple gold band onto Grace's finger, his hand was steady and sure. "I promise to love and cherish you all our days," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "You and Lily both. You're my family now, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are to me." Grace felt her heart overflow. "I promise to trust you with my heart, to build a life with you, to be your partner in all things. You gave me hope when I'd lost it, and I'll never forget that gift." They kissed as husband and wife, and even cynical old Tom had to wipe his eyes. Afterward, they stopped at the general store for supplies before heading home. Grace noticed the same women who'd whispered about her that first day, watching from across the street. But this time Grace held her head high, her hand clasped in her husband's, her daughter in her arms. She belonged somewhere now. She was someone's wife, and that someone chose her freely, knowing everything about her past and loving her anyway. Let them whisper if they wanted. It didn't matter anymore. Back at the ranch, Isaac carried Grace over the threshold of the main house, both of them laughing. That night, he moved her things and Lily's from the foreman's cabin into the main house, into the master bedroom that was now theirs to share. Life settled into a new rhythm, one of partnership and love. Grace managed the household with Isaac's full support and appreciation. When Lily fussed at night, Isaac would get up too, walking the floor with her so Grace could rest. When Grace felt overwhelmed, Isaac would take over dinner and shoo her outside to breathe and relax. They worked together, played together, built their life together. Tom and William became more like family than employees, often staying for dinner and evening conversation. William particularly doted on Lily, declaring himself her honorary uncle. Tom, more reserved, still made wooden toys for her in his spare time, leaving them on the porch without comment. Winter came to Dakota Territory, bringing deep snows and bitter cold. But the ranch house was warm and bright, filled with laughter and love. Grace would sit in her rocking chair by the fire, Lily in her lap, while Isaac worked on ranch accounts nearby. Sometimes he'd look up and catch her eye, and they'd share a smile that needed no words. On Christmas morning, Isaac gave Grace a locket containing a tiny photograph of the three of them, taken by a traveling photographer who'd passed through in November. Grace gave Isaac a new saddle blanket she'd woven herself, working on it secretly for months. But the best gift was simply being together, being a family, belonging to each other. As winter gave way to spring, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. She'd been afraid to hope for it, worried that maybe the difficult birth with Lily had damaged something. But the doctor in Yankton confirmed it. She was due in late September. Isaac was thrilled, already planning additions to the house to make room for their growing family. Grace was happy too, though nervous about going through childbirth again. But this time she had Isaac beside her, supporting and encouraging her through every stage. Lily celebrated her first birthday in June with a small party attended by Tom, William, and a few neighboring ranch families Isaac had become friendly with. Grace baked a special cake, and Lily destroyed it with enthusiastic joy, getting frosting everywhere. Isaac took dozens of mental pictures, wanting to remember every detail of this perfect day. In September, Grace went into labor during an early autumn storm. Isaac rode through wind and rain to fetch the doctor from Yankton, then stayed by Grace's side through the long, difficult hours that followed. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Isaac held him with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," Isaac whispered. "You're perfect, thank you." They named him Samuel after Isaac's father. Sam was an easy baby, content and peaceful in contrast to Lily's earlier fussiness. Lily, now walking and getting into everything, was fascinated by her baby brother, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding. The next few years passed in a blur of happiness. The ranch prospered under Isaac's careful management, allowing them to expand their herd and hire more help. Grace continued managing the household, though Isaac insisted on hiring a young woman from town to help with the heavy cleaning and laundry, not wanting Grace to exhaust herself. In 1879, Grace gave birth to their daughter Emma, a tiny thing with Isaac's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. In 1881, another son arrived, Theodore, who they called Teddy. The house that had once been too large and empty for one lone bachelor was now filled to bursting with children's laughter and the organized chaos of family life. Isaac proved to be a devoted father, involved in every aspect of his children's upbringing. He taught them to ride, to care for animals, to appreciate the land. But he also read them stories every night, played endless games of imagination, and wasn't above getting down on the floor to play with blocks or dolls or whatever captured their interest that day. Grace watched him with their children and felt her love for him deepen in ways she hadn't thought possible. He was a true partner in every sense, supporting her dreams as fiercely as she supported his. When she mentioned wanting to learn to read better, having only basic skills from her limited schooling, Isaac brought home books and patiently helped her practice. When he talked about wanting to improve breeding lines in his cattle, she helped him research and plan, becoming his sounding board and advisor. Lily grew into a bright, curious child who followed Isaac around the ranch whenever allowed, pestering him with endless questions. He never got impatient with her, always took her questions seriously. And he never treated her differently than his biological children, never made her feel less than fully his daughter. One day when Lily was 7, she asked Grace about her father. They were in the kitchen making bread together, flour dusting their hands and aprons. "I know Pa isn't my real father," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Susie Miller at school said so. She said I must be a bastard child." Grace's hands stilled in the dough. She'd known this conversation would come someday, but it still hurt to hear. "What did you say to Susie?" "I told her she was wrong. I told her Pa is my real father in every way that counts. He loves me and takes care of me and teaches me things. That makes him my real father." Grace pulled Lily into a flowery hug. "You're absolutely right. Family isn't just about blood, it's about love and commitment. Your Pa chose to be your father, and that makes it real. What about the man who was there when I was born? Where is he?" Grace took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "That man is gone and he's not coming back. He made bad choices and hurt people. But you know what? I'm glad things happened the way they did, because otherwise I wouldn't have met your Pa, and Sam and Emma and Teddy wouldn't exist. Sometimes the bad things lead to good things we never could have imagined." "I'm glad we met Pa too," Lily said. "He's the best Pa in the world." That evening, Grace told Isaac about the conversation. He listened quietly, his jaw tight with anger at the Miller girl's cruelty. "I should have a talk with Lily," he said. "Make sure she knows how much she means to me. I think she already knows, but it wouldn't hurt to tell her again." Isaac found Lily in her room, playing with the wooden horses Tom had carved for her. He sat down on the floor beside her, his long legs awkward in the small space. "Your ma told me what happened at school today." Lily looked up, worried. "Am I in trouble?" "No, sweetheart, not at all. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. But I wanted to talk to you about something important." Isaac picked up one of the wooden horses, turning it over in his hands. "I want you to know that you're my daughter, fully and completely. The fact that you weren't born from my blood doesn't change that one bit. I chose you, Lily." From the very first day I met you and your ma, I chose you both, and I'd make that choice again 1,000 times over. Really?" Lily's voice was small. "Really. You're mine just as much as Sam and Emma and Teddy are mine. And if anyone ever tells you different, you send them to me and I'll set them straight." Lily threw her arms around Isaac's neck. "I love you, Pa. I love you too, little one, more than you'll ever know." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. There were hard times too, of course. A drought one summer that threatened the cattle. A winter so harsh they lost part of the herd. Times when money was tight and worry kept Isaac up at night. But they faced everything together, Grace and Isaac, partners in every sense. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Grace with a trip to Sioux Falls. They left the children with Tom and William, who'd moved into the bunkhouse but were practically family at this point, and spent 3 days just being together. They stayed in a real hotel, ate at restaurants, attended a theater performance. It was a luxury they rarely allowed themselves, and Grace treasured every moment. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked one night as they lay in the unfamiliar hotel bed. "Taking a chance on me on this life?" Grace propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "Never. Not for one single second. You gave me everything, Isaac. A home, a family, love that I'd stopped believing existed. How could I regret the best thing that ever happened to me?" "I'm the one who got the better end of that deal," Isaac said, pulling her close. "You made me happier than I ever knew I could be. You took a lonely bachelor and turned him into a husband and father. You made that big empty house into a home. I thank God every day that you stepped off that stagecoach in Yankton. We've built a good life," Grace said softly. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was running scared and alone, and it's only going to keep getting better." She was right. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Isaac's reputation for honest dealing and quality cattle spread, bringing business from across Dakota Territory and beyond. He expanded operations, bought more land, hired more help. But success never changed who Isaac was at his core. He remained the same kind, steady man Grace had fallen in love with, devoted to his family above all else. He made time for his children no matter how busy the ranch kept him. Never missed a birthday or important event, was always ready with a hug or word of encouragement. Grace blossomed too, her confidence growing with each passing year. She became involved in the community, helping organize church events and charitable drives. She started a small sewing business on the side, making dresses for women in Yankton. But her first priority was always her family, the precious people Isaac had helped her believe she deserved. Lily grew into an intelligent young woman, passionate about horses and ranching. At 16, she announced she wanted to help run the ranch seriously, not just play at it. Isaac was thrilled, teaching her everything he knew about cattle and land management. She had a natural gift for it, and Isaac often said she'd probably run the whole operation someday. Sam was quieter, more scholarly, happiest with his nose in a book. He talked about going to university someday, maybe becoming a lawyer or teacher. Emma was all fire and spirit, constantly getting into scrapes and adventures. And Teddy was the baby, sweet and sensitive, who loved animals with a passion that suggested he might become a veterinarian. In 1889, when Lily was 18 and preparing to take on more responsibility at the ranch, Grace discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise at age 36. Isaac was delighted, though Grace felt a bit overwhelmed at starting over with a baby when her other children were growing up. Their last child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in early 1890. She completed their family in a way they hadn't known they needed, bringing fresh joy and energy into their lives. Years continued to roll by, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their children. Lily eventually married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man named Henry Thompson, who shared her passion for the land. They built a house on the far corner of the Owens property and ran their own small operation while still helping Isaac with his. Sam did indeed go to university, studying law in Omaha. He came home for summers and holidays, always with fascinating stories about city life, though he admitted he missed the wide open spaces of home. Emma shocked everyone by announcing at 19 that she wanted to be a doctor. It was an unusual choice for a woman, but Isaac and Grace supported her dream, helping her find a medical school that would accept female students. Teddy, as predicted, pursued veterinary studies, eventually returning to Yankton to open a practice that served all the ranches in the region. And Rose, the baby, grew up surrounded by love and laughter. Never knowing anything but security and family through it all, Isaac and Grace remained each other's anchors, their love deepening and maturing with each passing year. They'd built something remarkable together, a family and legacy that would endure for generations. One evening in 1905, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Grace reflected on how far they'd come. She was 52 now, her dark blonde hair threaded with silver. Isaac was 55, his face weathered by years of sun and wind, but his eyes still bright when they looked at her. 29 years, Grace said softly. 29 years since I stepped off that stagecoach, terrified and alone. Best day of my life, Isaac said, taking her hand. Well, second best. Best was when you married me. I was so scared that day. I thought I'd lost everything, that my life was over. I never imagined I'd end up here like this, so happy I almost can't stand it sometimes. Isaac squeezed her hand. You know what I remember most about that day? The way you held Lily, like she was the most precious thing in the world. The way you lifted your chin even though you were shaking. I knew right then you were special, that you had the kind of strength that really matters. You saved us, Grace said. You and your words about how none of it mattered to you. I'd heard nothing but judgment for so long, and then you just offered kindness with no strings attached. You gave us a chance when no one else would. No, Isaac said firmly. I gave you an opportunity, but you're the one who built this life. You're the one who chose to trust again after being hurt. You're the one who made our house a home. You saved yourself, Grace. I just got lucky enough to be there to help. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. Around them, the ranch bustled with life. Lily and Henry's children played in the yard while their parents checked on the cattle. Tom, ancient now but still going strong, sat in a rocking chair whittling. William had long since married and moved on, but he still visited regularly with his own family. Inside the house, Rose was practicing piano, the music drifting out through open windows. Sam was visiting from Omaha with his wife and twins. Emma was expected home tomorrow from her medical practice in Sioux Falls. Teddy was in the barn treating a sick calf. This was what they'd built, Grace and Isaac together. A family, a legacy, a home filled with love and laughter and the ordinary chaos of life fully lived. No regrets. Isaac asked, echoing their conversation from years ago. Grace lifted her head to look at him, this man who changed her entire world with his simple kindness and steadfast love. Not a single one. You. Only that I didn't find you sooner, Isaac said. That we didn't have even more years together. We have the rest of our lives still, Grace reminded him. And however long that is, it'll be enough because we'll be together. Isaac kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise renewed. Around them, their family continued about their business. The The ranch hummed with life, and the sun sank lower toward the horizon. This was their happily ever after, not a fairy tale ending but something better, something real. It was built on trust hard-won and love freely given. It was messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. Grace thought back to that desperate woman who'd arrived in Yankton with nothing but a baby and a prayer. She barely recognized herself in that frightened girl. She'd grown into someone confident and capable, someone who knew her own worth, because her husband reflected it back to her every single day. And Lily, her precious Lily, had grown up knowing nothing but love and security. She'd never had to feel the shame Grace had carried, never had to doubt her place in the world. Isaac had given her that gift, claiming her as his daughter so completely that no one, not even Lily herself, ever questioned it. Later that evening, after dinner with the whole boisterous family gathered around the long table, after the grandchildren had been tucked into beds throughout the house, after the dishes were washed and the house had finally quieted, Grace and Isaac sat together in their bedroom. "I wrote something for you," Grace said shyly, producing a folded paper from her drawer. "For our anniversary. I know it's not for a few more weeks, but I wanted you to have it now." Isaac unfolded the paper and read Grace's carefully penned words. It was a love letter, expressing everything she felt but sometimes struggled to say aloud. It spoke of gratitude and devotion, of respect and admiration, of a love that had only grown stronger with time. When he finished reading, Isaac's eyes were wet. "Grace, this is beautiful. Thank you. I mean every word. You're the best man I've ever known, Isaac Owens. I'm so proud to be your wife, so grateful for the life we've built together." "I'm the lucky one," Isaac said, pulling her close. "I got to love you, to watch you bloom and grow. I got to raise Lily and all our children. I got to build something meaningful with my best friend by my side. That's everything a man could want." They held each other in the quiet of their room, no more words needed. Outside, the wind whispered through the prairie grasses, the cattle lowed softly in the distance, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Years more would pass, bringing joys and sorrows as all lives do. There would be more grandchildren, eventually great-grandchildren. There would be losses too. Tom passing peacefully in his sleep at 85, other friends and family following over time. There would be changes, automobiles replacing horses, electricity coming to the ranch, the modern world encroaching on the Wild West they'd known. But through it all, Grace and Isaac would remain constants for each other, their love a bedrock that weathers all storms. They would grow old together, still holding hands, still finding joy in simple moments together. When Isaac died at 82, surrounded by his family after a life fully lived, his last words were, "Thank you for saying yes." Grace, holding his hand, knew he wasn't just thanking her for marrying him. He was thanking her for trusting him, for building a life with him, for all the years and love they'd shared. Grace lived 5 more years after Isaac's passing, surrounded by children and grandchildren who adored her. She spent those years sharing stories about their father and grandfather, making sure his legacy of kindness and integrity lived on. She spoke often of that day in Yankton, of how one man's simple acceptance had changed the trajectory of her entire life. When Grace finally passed peacefully at 84, Lily was holding her hand. Grace's last conscious thought was of Isaac, young and smiling, offering her a ride to his ranch on a hot June day, offering her hope when she'd thought she had none left. They buried Grace beside Isaac on a hill overlooking the ranch, the same hill where he'd first told her he loved her all those decades ago. The headstone was simple, stating their names and dates, but also bearing the words Grace had requested, "Together always." Their children and grandchildren continued to run the ranch, passing it down through generations. The story of how Grace and Isaac met became family legend, told and retold to teach the values they'd lived by. Kindness, acceptance, love that looked beyond circumstances to see the heart of a person. And on summer evenings, when the wind blew just right across the prairie, those who listened closely swore they could hear laughter on the breeze, the echoes of a love story that began with a simple act of compassion and grew into something extraordinary. Grace had arrived in Yankton with a baby and no ring, prepared for rejection and judgment. Instead, she found a cowboy who said those magical words, "That doesn't matter to me." And from that single moment of acceptance grew a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy that proved the transformative power of choosing kindness over judgment, love over fear, and hope over despair. It was a story that belonged to the Wild West, but transcended time itself, a reminder that the greatest adventures aren't about taming frontiers or building empires, but about opening your heart to another person and building a life together, one day at a time, with love as your foundation and trust as your guide. The ranch still stands today, run by Isaac and Grace's descendants who carry on their values and remember their story. And in Yankton, where it all began, old-timers still occasionally tell tales of the woman who arrived with nothing and the cowboy who saw past society's judgment to the person who needed a chance. They tell of the love that bloomed between them, strong and true, lasting until death and beyond. It was a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on someone, from offering kindness without conditions, from saying yes to love even when fear whispers no. It was Grace and Isaac's story, but in many ways, it belongs to anyone who's ever needed a second chance, anyone who's ever offered one, anyone who believes in the transformative power of love freely given and gratefully received. Their story ended not with dramatic flourishes, but with the quiet satisfaction of lives well lived, of love well shared, of a family well built. It ended with descendants who carry their blood and their values, with a ranch that still bears the mark of their care, with a legacy that proves the best happy endings aren't about perfect circumstances, but about perfect love found in imperfect situations. And really, isn't that the best kind of love story there is? The kind where two imperfect people find each other at just the right moment, choose to build something beautiful together, and create a love that outlasts even death itself. That's what Grace and Isaac did, starting from that dusty afternoon in Yankton, and continuing through every day they shared, building their happily ever after one choice, one moment, one act of love at a time.